Corporal James Mitchell stood at his post outside Windsor Castle, his red uniform perfectly pressed, and his expression stoically professional. At 35 years old, he had served as a royal guard for 12 years. Following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather before him, the Mitchell family had a proud tradition of military service that stretched back for generations. James took his duties seriously, perhaps more seriously than most. He had earned a reputation among his colleagues as someone who never broke protocol, never smiled while on duty, and maintained the strictest interpretation of Royal Guard regulations. His commanding officers appreciated his dedication, but some of his fellow guards quietly wondered if James had forgotten how to show emotion at all. The truth was that James carried invisible wounds from his service in Afghanistan before joining the Royal Guard. He had seen things that made it difficult to trust in joy or spontaneity. The rigid structure and predictability of guard duty provided him with the stability he needed, but it had also built walls around his heart that seemed impossible to break down on this crisp December morning. Tourists were already gathering despite the early hour and cold weather. Christmas was approaching, and Windsor Castle always drew larger crowds during the holiday season. James watched the visitors with his usual vigilant attention, noting families with children, elderly couples taking photographs, and tour groups. Following their guides, among the morning visitors was the Henderson family from a small town in Yorkshire. Sarah Henderson, a 32-year-old teacher, had saved for 2 years to bring her 6-year-old daughter Emma to see the Royal Guards during the Christmas season. It was meant to be a special treat, a memory they would treasure forever. Emma Henderson was everything her mother had hoped she would be: curious, kind, and filled with the innocent wonder that only young children possess. She had spent weeks preparing for this trip, reading picture books about castles and knights, and practicing her very best curtsies in front of her bedroom mirror. But Emma carried a secret wish in her heart, something she hadn't even told her. Mother. She had been battling leukemia for 8 months, enduring treatments that left her weak and often confined to hospital beds. Her thick brown hair had fallen out from chemotherapy, now covered by a bright pink knit hat that her grandmother made especially for this trip. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about Emma's progress, but the treatments were far from over. This trip to see the Royal Guards represented more than just a holiday adventure for the little girl. In her mind, it was a chance to meet real-life knights who could somehow make everything better. Just like in the fairy tales her mother read to her every night in the hospital. As the Henderson family approached the castle gates, Emma's eyes grew wide with amazement. The massive stone walls, the flags flying in the winter breeze, and most importantly, the magnificent guards in their iconic red uniforms all seemed like something from a dream. "Mummy," Emma whispered, tugging on her mother's coat. "They look just like the pictures in my books. Are they real knights?" Sarah smiled, her heart both swelling with joy at her daughter's excitement and aching with the knowledge of how much this moment meant to them both. Their Royal Guards, sweetheart. Protect the Queen and the castle, just like knights in the old stories. Emma studied the guards with intense fascination, but her attention kept returning to one guard in particular. Something about his serious expression and perfect posture reminded her of the brave knights in her favorite bedtime stories. She didn't know it yet, but she was looking at James Mitchell. Their lives were about to intersect in a way that would change them both forever. Emma spent the morning watching James from a respectful distance, her small face pressed against the iron railings that separated tourists from the guard posts. She observed how he never moved, never blinked unnecessarily, and maintained perfect posture despite the cold wind that made other visitors pull their coats tighter. "He must be very brave," Emma told her mother in a whisper that somehow carried more weight than her 6 years should allow. "Just like Sir Lancelot in the story you read me." Sarah noticed how her daughter's attention kept returning to this particular guard, and she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Emma had developed in fascination with knights and heroes since her diagnosis, often asking if brave knights could defeat the bad cells in her body the way they defeated dragons in fairy tales. As the morning progressed and went, taking photographs and marveling at the guards' discipline, but Emma remained content to simply watch and imagine. Her mother had brought a folding chair, knowing that the chemotherapy treatments often left Emma tired more quickly. Than other children her age, around midday, something unexpected happened. A tour group of elderly visitors approached, and one woman accidentally dropped her walking cane near James's post. The metal cane clattered loudly against the stone pavement. Several people rushed to help the woman retrieve it. In that moment, James's eyes flickered downward for just an instant. Not to look at the dropped cane, but because he had heard something else entirely. A small, sweet voice had whispered, "I hope the nice lady is okay." He couldn't turn his head to look, but James realized that someone very young was nearby, someone who cared more about an elderly stranger's well-being than about the spectacle of the guards. It was such a pure, unguarded expression of concern, that it stirred something in James that he had thought was permanently buried. Emma had indeed been the source of that whispered concern. When she saw the elderly woman struggle, her first instinct was to worry about someone else's comfort rather than her own entertainment. It was a quality her mother had noticed throughout Emma's illness. How the little girl often worried more about how her sickness affected others than about her own pain. After lunch, Sarah suggested they explore other parts of the castle, but Emma politely asked if they could stay a little longer. "I think he might be lonely," she explained, pointing toward James. "Knights in castles are sometimes lonely because they have to be brave all the time." Sarah was struck by her daughter's empathy. Despite everything Emma was facing in her own young life, she had noticed something in this stranger's demeanor that suggested isolation and had responded with compassion rather than indifference. "Would you like to draw him a picture?" suggested, pulling out the small sketch pad and colored pencils she always carried for Emma's quiet moments in hospitals and waiting rooms. Emma's face lit up with excitement. Do you think he would like that? It's for the next hour?" Emma worked on her drawing with the intense concentration that only children can bring to their art. She drew a castle with a brave knight standing guard. But she added details that weren't visible in the real scene before her. A small girl waving from a window, birds singing in nearby trees, and a bright sun shining down on everything as she worked. Emma began talking to her mother about her secret. Wish, the one she hadn't shared before. "Mummy, do you think if I make a wish to a real knight it might come true? Like in the stories?" Sarah's heart clenched, knowing exactly what kind of wish her brave little daughter was harboring. "What kind of wish, sweetheart?" Emma looked up from her drawing with eyes that held far too much wisdom for her age. "I want to wish that all the sick children could get better, and that the knights who protect everyone could be happy too." Selflessness of her daughter's wish brought tears to Sarah's eyes, but she managed to smile encouragingly. "That's a very beautiful wish, Emma. Very worthy of a true knight." As the afternoon drew on, Emma finished her drawing and held it up proudly for her mother to see. The picture showed remarkable detail for a 6-year-old's work, with the knight standing tall and strong, but with a gentle smile on his face that somehow made him seem both powerful and kind. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah said, meaning every word. "What would you like to do with it?" Emma looked toward James, who continued his motionless vigil. "I want to give it to him, but I don't think I'm allowed to go that close, am I?" Sarah checked her watch and noticed that the changing of the guard would happen soon. She had read about the ceremony in their guidebook and knew it would provide a brief opportunity when the guards would be moving and potentially more approachable. "Let's wait for the changing ceremony," Sarah suggested. "Maybe there will be a moment when you can give it to him properly." Emma nodded eagerly, clutching her drawing carefully to protect it from the afternoon breeze that had picked up. Tourists began gathering in anticipation of the ceremony, but Emma remained focused solely on her mission to deliver her artwork to the guard who had captured her. Imagination as the ceremony began, James prepared for the precise movements he had performed hundreds of times before, but today felt different somehow. Throughout his shift, he had been aware of the small presence nearby, the child who had whispered concern for a stranger and who had spent hours quietly observing his duties with genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. During the formal inspection that preceded the changing, James caught a glimpse of Emma from the corner of his eye. She was a tiny figure bundled in a winter coat, her pink knit hat bright against the gray stone of the castle walls. Something about her stillness and patience reminded him of his own childhood, when he had visited these same gates with his grandfather, and dreamed of becoming a guard himself. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. But as James prepared to march away from his post, something unprecedented happened. Emma stepped forward from the crowd, her small voice carrying clearly. In the crisp air, "Excuse me, Sir Knight," she called out with perfect politeness. "I made something for you." The formal protocol demanded that James continue his march without acknowledgement. But something in the child's voice stopped him. In 12 years of service, he had never broken formation during a ceremony, never deviated from the prescribed movements that were as natural to him as breathing. Yet here he was, turning slightly to look down at a little girl who was holding up a drawing with both hands, her face glowing with hope and nervous excitement. The other guards in the ceremony paused almost imperceptibly. Recognizing that something extraordinary was happening, Emma took a small step forward. Her drawing extended like an offering. "I drew you protecting the castle," she explained with the serious tone children use when something is deeply important to them. "I wanted to thank you for being so brave." James found himself facing a choice that went far beyond military protocol. He could follow regulations and continue the ceremony as if nothing had happened. Or he could acknowledge this child whose innocent gesture was touching something in his heart that he had thought was permanently sealed away. The crowd of tourists had grown completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something special. Even the other guards seemed to understand that this moment transcended normal procedures. The little girl waited patiently, her drawing held steady despite the trembling. In her small hands, her eyes filled with the absolute trust that only children can offer to the adults they believe in. James made a decision that would be remembered long after his service ended. Slowly, with the same precision he brought to all his movements, he stepped out of formation and walked toward Emma. His fellow guards watched in amazement as their most protocol-conscious colleague did something that had never happened in the history of the changing ceremony, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. James removed his tall bearskin hat and set it carefully on the ground beside him. For the first time in 12 years of service, his face was fully visible to the public while in uniform, and what people saw surprised them. Gone was the stern, emotionless expression they expected. Instead, they witnessed genuine warmth and something that looked very much like wonder. "Thank you, young lady," James said softly, accepting the drawing with hands that were perfectly steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received while on duty." Emma beamed with pure joy, her small face lighting up in a way that made several tourists reach for their cameras, though something about the moment made them hesitate to intrude with photography. "Why did it make you smile?" she said with the honest directness that only children possess. Knights in the stories are always brave, but they're happiest when they smile. James looked down at the drawing, taking in every detail Emma had included. The castle was perfectly recognizable, and the knight in the center stood proud and strong. But it was the small additions, the singing birds and the bright sun, the little girl waving from the window, that revealed the heart of the artist. "You draw very well," James said, and meant it. "What's your name?" "Emma Henderson," she replied. Then added with the formality she thought appropriate for addressing a knight, "It's very nice to meet you, sir." James felt something crack open inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. "It's very nice to meet you too, Emma. I'm James, and I'm honored to accept your gift." Sarah watched from nearby, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed her daughter's joy at having her gesture accepted so gracefully. She could see that this guard understood the significance of this moment for Emma, and his kindness was more than she had dared hope for. Emma took a small step closer, emboldened by James's gentle response. "James," she said, trying out his name, "can I tell you a secret wish?" James nodded seriously, recognizing that whatever this child was about to share was deeply important to her. "Of course, Emma. Knights are very good at keeping secrets." Emma glanced back at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, then looked up at James with eyes that held far too much experience for someone so young. "I wish that all the sick children could get better soon. I wish that all the knights who protect people could remember to be happy sometimes too." The simplicity and selflessness of her wish hit James like a physical blow. Here was a child who was clearly facing her own struggles, yet her first thought was for other sick children and for his happiness. In that moment, all the walls he had built around his heart since Afghanistan, all the emotional distance he had maintained through years of rigid military service, crumbled completely. "That's a very special wish, Emma," James said, his voice slightly rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "And I want you to know that talking with you today has already made me happier than I've been in a very long time." The crowd of tourists had grown larger, drawn by the unprecedented break in protocol. But their presence seemed secondary to the connection forming between the battle-hardened guard and the brave little girl, who had seen past his uniform to the person underneath. James carefully folded Emma's drawing and placed it in his uniform pocket, close to his heart. "Emma," he said thoughtfully, "I want to make you a promise. Every day when I stand guard, I'm going to remember your wish and try to find moments to be happy even while I'm being brave and protecting people." Emma's eyes widened with delight. "Really? You promise?" "I promise," James said solemnly, understanding that promises made to children are the most sacred kind. "And I'm going to keep your drawing with me to remind me." Sarah stepped forward, recognizing that this magical moment needed to come to a gentle close. "Emma, we should let James get back to his important work now." But James held up a hand gently. "Actually, if it's all right with you, I'd like to ask Emma something." He turned back to the little girl with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Would you like to see my ceremonial sword? Knights always have special swords, and I think you'd appreciate the craftsmanship." Emma gasped with excitement, and Sarah nodded her permission. James carefully unsheathed his sword, holding it flat across his palms so Emma could see the intricate engravings and the way the winter sunlight reflected off the polished blade. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, reaching out one finger to gently touch the flat side of the blade. "Looks like it could defeat any dragon." "It could indeed," James agreed seriously. "But do you know what I've learned in all my years as a guard? The most important battles aren't fought with swords. They're fought with kindness, courage, and hope. And you, Emma, are one of the bravest warriors I've ever met." Emma blushed with pride, but then her expression grew thoughtful. "James, do you think knights can help sick children get better? Not with swords, but with the other kind of fighting you talked about." James felt his throat tighten with emotion as he understood the deeper meaning behind her question. "I believe they can, Emma. Sometimes the most powerful thing a knight can do is remind people that they're not alone in their battles. And sometimes meeting brave people like you reminds us knights why our work matters so much." He sheathed his sword and looked directly into Emma's eyes. "You've reminded me today of something very important. Being a good knight isn't just about standing perfectly still and following rules. It's about connecting with people and remembering what we're protecting and why it's worth protecting." The senior guard, who had been watching from a distance, approached respectfully. James knew he would need to answer questions about his breach of protocol, but surprisingly, the older man's expression showed approval rather than disapproval. "Corporal Mitchell," the senior guard said formally, then added with unmistakable warmth, "That was beautifully handled. Sometimes the most important duty we can perform is showing the people we protect that there are real human beings inside. These uniforms?" James stood and retrieved his bearskin hat, but before putting it back on, he knelt down one more time to Emma's level. "Emma, I want you to remember something very important. You made a wish about sick children getting better, and knights being happy. Well, you've already made this night much happier, and I believe that kind of magic, the kind that comes from a pure heart like yours, really can help healing happen." Emma threw her small arms around James's neck in an impulsive hug that broke about 15 different Royal Guard regulations and didn't matter one bit to anyone watching. "Thank you for being my knight, James," she whispered in his ear. "I'll remember you forever." James hugged her back gently, not caring who saw or what. Regulations he was breaking. "And I'll remember you, Emma, every single day." As the Henderson family prepared to leave Windsor Castle, Emma turned back one more time to wave at James, who had resumed his position, but now stood with something indefinably different about his bearing. The rigid perfection was still there, but underneath it was a warmth that hadn't existed before their meeting. Sarah approached James briefly before they left. "Corporal Mitchell," she said quietly, "I wanted you to know that Emma is battling leukemia. This trip was her special wish, and what you did for her today, it means more than you could possibly know." James felt his heart skip a beat as the full significance of their encounter became clear. This brave little girl, facing such an enormous challenge, had spent her wish not on herself, but on others. Her concern for sick children and lonely nights suddenly carried profound meaning. "Mrs. Henderson," James said, his professional composure intact, but his voice filled with genuine emotion, "Emma is an extraordinary child. Her strength and kindness have changed something in me today. Please keep in touch and let me know how she's doing." Sarah handed him a card with their contact information, tears in her eyes. "She talks about knights and heroes constantly during her treatments. Today, she met a real one." 3 months later, James received a letter that he would treasure for the rest of his life. Emma's treatments were going well, and she had shared the story of their meeting with every child in the pediatric ward. Her drawing had been photocopied and hung in hospital rooms across the country, inspiring other young patients with its message of hope and courage. But the letter contained an even more wonderful surprise. Emma had started a small project she called Knights for Kids, where she made drawings for children in hospitals, each one featuring a brave knight standing guard over sick children, protecting them while they fought their battles. The project had grown beyond anything she had imagined. With art supplies donated by strangers who had heard her story, James immediately knew what he wanted to do. He requested permission to visit Emma during his leave time, and to his surprise, his commanding officers not only approved, but decided to make it an official Royal Guard visit to support the children's hospital, the day of the visit. At the hospital in full dress uniform, carrying a special gift he had commissioned from the royal jeweler. It was a small silver pendant shaped like a castle, with tiny knight figures standing guard around it. Engraved on the back were the words for Emma, the bravest knight of all. Emma's face when she saw him walk into the pediatric ward was something James would never forget. Her hair had grown back in soft curls, and though she was still thin from treatments, her eyes held the same bright spirit that had captured his heart at Windsor Castle. "James," she exclaimed, running to him with the unbridled joy that only children can express. "You came to see me?" "I promised I would remember you every day," James said, kneeling down to her level, just as he had months before. "And I wanted to see how my favorite knight was doing in her most important battle." The visit became a celebration for the entire ward. James spent hours with the children, sharing stories, answering questions about castle life, and most importantly, listening to their own stories of courage and hope. Emma proudly showed him how her Knights for Kids project had grown, with hundreds of drawings now decorating hospital walls across the country. As the afternoon ended, Emma pulled James aside with the serious expression she wore when something was deeply important to her. "James," she said, "my wish is coming true. The doctors say I'm getting much better, and look at all these happy children. But the best part is that you kept your promise too. You smile now when you stand guard, don't you?" James nodded, realizing that she was absolutely right. Since their meeting, he had found joy in his service in ways he never had before. The rigid discipline was still there, but it was now balanced with genuine warmth for the people he protected and pride in representing something greater than himself. "You were right about knights, Emma," James said. "The most important battles really are fought with kindness, courage, and hope. And you've shown me that the strongest people aren't always the ones in armor. Sometimes they're brave little girls who make wishes for others and change the world one heart at a time." Years later, when James told this story to other guards and to his own children, he always ended it the same way. "Emma taught me that breaking tradition isn't always breaking rules. Sometimes it's about remembering why the traditions matter in the first place, and having the courage to put human kindness above everything else."